I've always been fascinated with Antarctica since I was a little kid, and I always wanted to go there. I'd heard lots of stories about Captain Scott of the Antarctic. You very seldom, as someone who was Brit-centric, heard about anyone else. And as I started to grow up, I realized that there were other players who were perhaps even more involved in this quest for the South Pole than Scott. And as I reached adulthood, I desperately wanted to try and go to Antarctica. And I realized that to go there as a fare-paying passenger would be out of the question in terms of the cost. So I began in 2008 actively to research Scott, Shackleton, and Amundsen with a view to telling stories well enough that hopefully somebody would employ me to get onto a ship and share these stories in Antarctica. And of course, the motivation for that was all the centenaries were coming up, with Amundsen in 2011, Scott in 2012, and Shackleton in 2014-16, at least the centenary of his endurance expedition. So I began telling those stories in various audiences and venues. And that's really how this journey began, going to Antarctica. I've been going down every year since 2011, most years a number of times in the year, and we run a number of trips from Ushuaia down into Antarctica. And with it has developed a great interest in the Arctic. So I've done a number of trips up into the Arctic, and normally running around Greenland or running from Greenland through the Northwest Passage up to Nome on the Bering Strait, and then flying home from Nome, along with other trips that I now do on the west coast of Canada and Alaska, because I'm fascinated by the Iditarod and the building of the Alaskan-Canadian Highway, and of course the wildlife in that area. And the scenery is beyond description with the glaciers and the orcas and everything that goes on the west coast of Canada and Alaska. It's a gorgeous part of our planet. So I'm very fortunate in doing a lot of that sort of work in the respective summers outside of COVID. Those cruises and expeditions right now have been knocked into oblivion by COVID, sadly.
A lot of things have, but Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, those are the three big names, aren't they? Once you get into things. And I actually read Shackleton's book, South, isn't it? Or something like that, which is a really, really impressive book to read. And just all of the outer sort of like, it's like you're talking about a different planet, and of the things that happened with orcas just appearing out of holes and things like that, hunting seals, and was it parhelions in the sky almost all the time, and things like that. Have you seen some of these things in your travels?
Oh, very much so, thankfully, yes. The light does amazing things down in Antarctica, whether it's the Australis, the Southern Lights as they are known, or the halos that you're referring to around the sun that can really disorientate you in terms of where you are, which direction you're looking at. We see a great many orcas along with the other wildlife down there. Orcas sometimes come very, very close to the zodiacs, gorgeous creatures, highly intelligent, sometimes swim on each side of the ship and then swim underneath the ship. So yes, many of those things that Shackleton describes, I've been fortunate enough to experience. I haven't experienced an Antarctic winter as they did, 4 months of complete darkness. And of course, I haven't been down there with animals, which you're trying to look after, like horses and dogs, which the average orca would see as potential prey. And so I've been spared that sort of difficulty. But that book, South, sadly, is filled with understatement. It's a remarkable book and a journal of their adventures on the Endurance. But you really want to read the books called Endurance, two different versions by two different authors, one called Alfred Lansing and the other called Caroline Alexander. Their books on the Endurance expedition are, in my opinion, the best in terms of giving you a lively account of what happened, where Shackleton's is so filled with understatement. You cannot believe that day after day after day, they are all living with threat to their lives. And yet his book is filled with such commonplace understatement as if all was well.
That's so true. I actually remember thinking that at the time, that this guy is just so calm about this situation? How can this be? It sort of colors, I think, how people think about Shackleton, to be honest, because he's the reputation of the man is just this unflappable positive force that says, oh, okay, we're trapped in the ice, all right, we'll get through that. Oh, the ship has been broken to splinters, we'll just camp on the ice and find a way across. Nothing seemed to faze him in that book.
You did right. You know, when the ship went down, he said, the ship is gone, now we'll go home. And he had to figure out a way to try and make that possible. And what followed is the greatest survival story our race will probably ever know. But the understatement, the imperturbability of Shackleton, and the fact that he always believed in a positive outcome is quite extraordinary.
I think he's a very inspiring guy for that reason. I love his quote about a man must sort of set his sights on the next challenge as soon as the last one disappears, or something like that.
Right.
Another guy that I don't know very much about, however, is probably the most I don't know, competent or impressive polar explorer, and that is Mr. Amundsen, I think.
Look, he is without a doubt the greatest polar explorer ever. You know, he tends to be maligned for the fact that he kept his intentions a secret from the world when he went down to Antarctica. And the British particularly didn't feel that was cricket when there was a race for the South Pole. Everyone was hoping, the British were certainly hoping Robert Scott would win the race. But there was also a German, a Japanese, a French, and an American expedition who were trying to make a similar crack on the pole at that time. Most of those expeditions never even started off across the continent, but be that as it may. Amundsen was the first man through the Northwest Passage, the first man to the South Pole, and indeed the first man over the North Pole. Admittedly, he wasn't on the ice. They flew over it in a hot air balloon, a dirigible, with Nomberto Umbile, who was a very, very controversial Italian. But Amundsen was the greatest polar explorer by some head and shoulders above the rest of them. His preparation, his experience, the way that he planned things, and most particularly, those who grow up in those Nordic countries basically learn to ski as soon as they learn to walk. And the experience of life in those frigid climes and frigid environments is better than any other nations in the world. So where the British were still trying to learn to ski, trying to learn how to handle dogs pulling a sled, trying to master how to cope with the nematode infestations on the dogs that arise on account of the dogs always eating excreta and so forth, beggars belief, where Amundsen had all that under control. And they made the journey look, I wouldn't say easy, that would be a dreadful understatement, but they certainly made the journey look far less challenging and less demanding and less fraught with danger than Scott's men. And sadly, I think Scott and his comrades probably died psychologically in the moment they realized they'd been beaten to the pole by the Norwegians.
That sounds like it could be the case, certainly. I mean, in those circumstances, if you take a psychological blow, it's not going to help your survival chances at all. You have to, it takes, I mean, I've never been in many, like, I've not been in any survival situations particularly. I've been on some rather punishing treks through the Highlands of Scotland before. And I can tell from just the small, that doesn't register on the scale of survivalism, all right, everybody listening. But what it does do, if you go out, if you choose to go out into remote places and walk and explore and climb things, you'll soon find out how important a robust mental attitude is to finishing it. And the smallest thing can almost add 10 pounds to your pack.
Absolutely. That robust mental attitude is probably one of the most important aspects to determining in a survival situation whether you make it out alive or not.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, people like Shackleton, who we must admit got into a rather difficult situation, and Amundsen obviously had those in quite hefty amounts, and so I thought I would bring that up, the polar explorer, the polar exploration element to your interests, my interests too, if I get the time to read about them. I think more people should be able to read about them if they so choose. It's not boring at all. It's really fascinating how these explorations to Antarctica and the North Pole happened, and all the dangers and drama involved in them. I mean, it goes back a long way as well. I mean, into the 1840s, the search for the Northwest Passage obviously ended in considerable degree of disaster for a particularly infamous, famous British expedition, which, why don't I remember the name of the guy in charge of that?
John Franklin.
Yes, the Franklin expedition. Another one of my brilliant mental blanks.
Don't worry,
but
I live in fear of a mental blank, Josh, and they happen to us all. Whether it's a date, a name, some detail, it's quite difficult having them all at your fingertips all the time. So don't give that a thought.
Okay, thank you very much. But yeah, that's another just one example of the perils of what would you call it? Polar exploration is essentially just how wrong dramatically it can go in a very short space of time.
Absolutely.
It just adds to the drama a little there, doesn't it? We may have covered all we can cover, perhaps.
Wonderful speaking with you today. I hope we might have opportunity to do so again. And I wish you well with all your ventures. And I hope that our little time together and this video is of interest to some of your viewers. I'd be delighted if it were.
As would I, and echo the sentiment there. It's been a delight to talk to you today, and absolutely, I will be back in touch in the future, and we'll sort out another video chat, and we'll just have a nice conversation and see what comes out of it. And as you say, hopefully, viewers, you have enjoyed, watching this video. You've been rewarded for clicking on that button. Obviously, I'll put all pertinent links in the description box below. That will lead you to Rob's website and his YouTube channel himself. Please subscribe to that. Go and watch it, give likes and things, and please do the same here. And we'll see you again for another adventure in Historyland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. Go well. Good luck.